Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome to Saturday in the fourth week of Lent 2024. Thank you for joining me, Reverend Father Anthony Mario Ozele of the Catholic Diocese of Warri in Delta State, Nigeria. Today's liturgical readings are from the prophecy of Jeremiah chapter 11 from verse 18 to verse 20 and John's Gospel chapter 7 from verse 44 to verse 53. I'm going to be sharing with you today on the theme, Getting Off the Fence. John's Gospel offers us sketches of different personalities and characters, very interesting individuals. So in John's Gospel, we meet Andrew, we meet Philip, we meet Nathaniel, we meet Peter. We meet these individuals, some of whom are given one short episode or encounter with Jesus that brings them to faith, like Nathaniel. And then there are others who have several episodes and encounters with Jesus, like Thomas, like Peter, and of course like Nicodemus. And then we also have others like Pilate, who were witness to and came very close, came face to face with the Messiah, but could not accept him. Then we meet others like John the Baptist, who are presented as always being so faithful to the task of proclaiming the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And then of course you have personalities like Zacchaeus and Matthew the tax collector, and of course Judas. But our focus today is on Nicodemus. Nicodemus is introduced as a Pharisee. The Pharisees were a very strict religious sect. They were very much devoted to God, and they prided themselves on their devotion to God. They focused on being ritually clean with various acts of ceremonial ablutions, washings, observing the Sabbath and the Jewish festivals with very precise and strict discipline. The Pharisees were most careful about what they ate and the people they came in contact with. They observed very strict Jewish laws about clean and unclean foods. They would fast twice a week. They were very scrupulous about religious practices such as tithing. But all of that never really brought them to the true knowledge of God and of Jesus Christ. Nicodemus is also presented as a teacher of Israel, a teacher of the Jewish law. Now, there were about 3 classes of teachers of Judaism, and Nicodemus belonged to the highest class of teachers. These were the ones that interpreted the Jewish law for everybody else. They knew their scriptures backwards and inside out. They knew everything that all their predecessors had said concerning the text of scriptures. They knew the oral traditions. They knew the stories of the famous rabbis. And they would debate endlessly the tiniest details of the Jewish law. If it was possible to find God just by knowing the scriptures, then these teachers of the law like Nicodemus would have done so. But it isn't. Knowing God is not just an intellectual exercise. It's not a test of our ability to memorize, to have memory verses, or even of understanding. When it comes to knowing God, being clever doesn't give anybody an advantage. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And having intimacy with that person that you know, that person in this instance being Jesus Christ. Nicodemus was a member of the Jewish ruling council, the Sanhedrin. In other words, he had risen to a position of prominence in Jerusalem. He was a member of this esteemed council. Under the Romans, the Sanhedrin had the authority to run the city of Jerusalem because it was a holy place. Now, if being influential, if being powerful counted for anything in knowing God, then every member of the Sanhedrin would have known God. But of course, being important counts for nothing when it comes to knowing God. So today's text is the second time we're encountering Nicodemus in John's Gospel. The first time we meet him is way back in chapter 3 when he comes to Jesus by night. That time, the darkness of the night is reflected upon the darkness of Nicodemus' heart. Some commentators actually propose that Nicodemus came to Jesus by night because he knew that Jesus was always busy during the day, and so he would have more time to discuss with him at night because it would be more peaceful. But when you consider the note on which chapter 2 ended, after Jesus had cleaned out the temple and he was accosted by the Sanhedrin, then you will understand that Nicodemus probably came to Jesus at night because he was afraid to be seen by his fellow Pharisees. Today then, we get another look at Nicodemus. Jesus had just finished his appeal to the people on the Feast of the Tabernacles. The Jerusalem crowd had become divided. Some believed in him, others were bitterly opposed to him. The Pharisees had sent out the temple police to arrest Jesus, but they were unable to lay hands on him because they had been overawed, they had been swayed by the power of his teaching. So they returned to the Pharisees empty-handed, who admonished them, who rebuked them, and dismissed them. The last statement that the Pharisees made before Nicodemus spoke up was that, after all, none of the Jewish leaders or the Pharisees have accepted or believed in Jesus. All of this was in an attempt to insult the guards for their lack of judgment. The Pharisees claimed solidarity with other Jewish leaders who were mostly Sadducees. Now, the Pharisees and the Sadducees were both religious groups that hated each other, yet they made a claim of solidarity when it came to hating Jesus and wanting to kill him. So, perhaps this was a warning to other Pharisees that the guards had defected. They needed to make sure that none of their own also defects. Following from Jesus' encounter with Nicodemus previously, we see that Nicodemus was open to listening to Jesus. His ears were open, his heart, a little doorway, into his heart. And that is what we see into this text. The Pharisees cursed out at the guards as the rabble that were ignorant of the law. But the irony of their statement is immediately exposed by Nicodemus. Nicodemus reminds his fellow Pharisees, members of the Sanhedrin council, who were accusing the guards of not knowing the law. Nicodemus was reminding them that it was actually against the law to condemn someone without giving them a hearing into the matter that they were being accused of. This involved the necessity of sworn testimony and the agreement of 2 or 3 witnesses in the case of a capital offense. By making this statement, Nicodemus not only exposes the fact that the Pharisees were willfully ignorant of the law, it also made them the subject of the same curse that they had just said about those in the crowd who followed Jesus. They were cursed for their own ignorance by their own mouths. Nicodemus had exposed the evil in their hearts. And the reaction of the Pharisees was quick and decisive. They called Nicodemus teacher of Israel. But they classed him with those they considered unlearned, those they considered ignorant. They said to him, "Certainly you are not one of those Galileans, are you?" They had already argued with the crowd that no prophet is to rise out of Galilee. This seems to be an indication that not a single prophet would come from Galilee. But hold on just a moment. Was Jonah not from Galilee? Was Nahum not from Galilee? So who is ignorant now? Who is ignorant of the law? We can see that it was the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, that were utterly ignorant of the facts. And if there was anyone to be cursed, they were the ones that were cursed. They were more in the dark than the temple guards. They were more in the dark than Nicodemus. Yes, Nicodemus had come a long way from his earlier encounter with Jesus when he went to him by night out of fear. But here he was now, bold enough, courageous enough to stand up for Jesus as a defense lawyer. He may not be a disciple yet, but at least he was a defense lawyer. The difference between a defense counselor and a disciple is that the lawyer argues the case, but after the argument, he or she goes home whether or not the client is found guilty or not guilty. The willingness to give Jesus his due process under the law by Nicodemus was good. But it did not raise him to the status of being a disciple. A disciple of Jesus is not just someone who speaks in defense of Jesus. A disciple of Jesus, a true disciple of Jesus, is one who is willing to live or to die with his master. And of all the apostles, only John would not have that honor of being killed, being executed for his name's sake. You see, Nicodemus had come a long way. He was brave enough to stand up for Jesus in a limited way, and he was dealt with viciously by his fellow council members. But he was halfway there. Now we must consider this in our daily walk with Jesus, that we cannot sit on the fence. As true believers and followers of Jesus Christ, who are being perfected day by day, we cannot afford to compromise with the world. We cannot identify ourselves as sophisticated people in society and be disciples of Jesus at the same time. I mean, we cannot just be sophisticated people who do not side with Jesus, who do not speak up for Jesus. The Bible warns us that friendship with the world is enmity with God. In like manner, friendship with God makes you an enemy of the world. If you try as a follower of Jesus if you try the path of compromise, you will be treated by your worldly peers in the same way Nicodemus was treated. But if you hold on to your faith with courage and boldness, you will still be held in contempt, but at least you will be respected as an adversary rather than a sellout. The most uncomfortable place that one can be in the Christian journey is to sit on the fence, trying to please two masters at the same time. My dear friends, we need to get off the fence. We need to get wholly on one side of the fence or the other. As the prophet Elijah would say, if God is God, then serve him. If Baal is God, then worship him. I believe that eventually Nicodemus, who probably was there at the foot of the cross watching Jesus die, will eventually become a disciple of Jesus. I believe he ended up becoming a follower. And I'm convinced of that because eventually Nicodemus will go with Joseph of Arimathea to request the body of Jesus Christ from Pilate. I don't think he would have spent a fortune on aloes and spices in order to give Jesus a kingly burial if he was not convinced by what he witnessed on Calvary that Jesus was the Messiah. He was no longer sitting on the fence. He had come round full cycle. He had become a child of God. He had become a member of God's family, a member of the fellowship of believers. How about you, my dear friend? Are you sitting on the fence still? If you have been sitting on the fence, it's time to get off the fence. It's time to be on the side of Jesus. And grace is available for us to walk with him all the days of our lives. Let us join that fellowship of believers and be active. Share this message, will you? God bless you as you do so. Amen.